All right, next up is Jack. He's going to talk to you a little bit more about responsive design.
So, as I promised, I'm going to be covering the pros and cons of responsive design. And I'm going to jump into talk a little bit about progressive enhancement versus graceful degradation. And finally, I'm going to give the 10 commandments of implementing an adaptive theme in WordPress. I'm talking less on the technical side. I'm going to be talking a little bit more about the theory behind developing. But before I start, I really just want to say that I'm really, truly grateful to be here, to be sharing the stage with such a rock star. Sonia, that was an awesome presentation. And to be at this venue. And to be at this venue, CBS Local, it's pretty cool. But most importantly, WordPress NYC. I'm new to the city, and maybe you guys are a little jaded to being in New York, but some of the top people in the world are here, and like right here in this room as well. So thank you, and thank you, Steve, for this opportunity to share my thoughts on responsive web design. So I'm going to jump in. Hi, I'm Jack. I build web stuff. Just 1 minute about me. I've been building websites since I was in high school in the 90s. I have a degree in philosophy. I thought it would be fun to learn some other things, but okay, what do you do with a degree in philosophy? My claim to fame is I got to build a plugin live in front of a live audience with Matt Mullenweg in the audience. That was pretty scary. So just under 2 years ago, Ethan Marcotte coined the phrase responsive web design, and since then it's been rocking the web community, and there's been a lot of discussion about it. And Sonia just showed us how awesome it really is. Well, I want to ask, what could possibly be wrong with responsive web design? In order to prepare for this, I dug to find whatever criticisms I could find. And frankly, I was disappointed because basically, I'd say 90% of the criticisms were excuses because people were not doing things right, and some people were being lazy, and then they were wondering why their theme wasn't working well. And so I'm going to go through the top 5 excuses that I found. There are a few cases where you don't want to use responsive web design, but for the most part, I'm going to just try to knock these down. Excuse number 1, it takes too long to build. Well, if you compare building a responsive web theme against building a regular desktop theme, yeah, it'll take a little bit longer. But if you tell your project manager that they'll be getting out of the deal not just desktop design, but also a widescreen design, an tablet design, and a mobile design, if you want to compare the 4 projects to the 1, I think you'll be doing quite a bit better with the responsive design. Excuse number 2, it takes too long to load. Now, any site, if you build it wrong, will take too long to load. And I've seen a lot of stupid things people doing, but honestly, I think that if you start with your rich media full site, and then you do display none, display none, display none, until all you have left is the mobile site, that's the wrong way to go about doing it. You're not going to load well in your browser. If you have a rich media site and you need to have a full desktop rich media site, that's the way you have to have a separate theme. But most sites, if there's no reason for it to have everything that it has in the screen, and I'll get to that a little bit later. But just if you're smart about how you build your code and how you start from the bottom and you respect your code, then you're going to end up with a beautiful site that doesn't take too long to load. Excuse number 3, image resizing is bad. And yes, image resizing is bad. If you want to have a responsive site, so you have to make some certain calculations. If your site doesn't have a lot of images, maybe you can scrunch them down a little bit. Maybe you don't have to play with anything. But honestly, this was the biggest critique that came out when responsive web design hit the web. that everyone was saying, oh, they're resizing images, that's really bad for your browsers. And resizing images is bad, but honestly, I think that a lot of those people were jealous that they didn't think it up themselves. Personally, I'm jealous I didn't think it up myself because it's a stroke of brilliance. But when it first came out, that was the proof of concept. And since then, a lot has happened. There's a lot of great tools out there. Last week, Chris Coyer on CSStricks.com wrote a whole blog post about the different ways that you can load the right image to the right site. And since then, I think a WordPress plugin actually came out. There's a lot of great solutions, and I'll try to post them to the notes so that people can find them. So yeah, image resizing is bad. You don't want to load a huge image on your page and then resize it down to your mobile. You'll end up with multiple gigabyte sites. Excuse number 4, too many breakpoints. If you design per device, you will have too many breakpoints, whether you have a responsive theme or whether you're building a theme for every single device. So you don't want to build your site for each and every breakpoint. And by breakpoint, I mean, one for the widescreen, one for the desktop theme, one for the tablet, one for the you don't want to have, because Android has, I think, something like over 200 plus image screen sizes, and if you try to design for each and every one, you're not going to do it. But you're not going to do it without a responsive theme either. But if you focus on your code, on your content, and you design for your content and make sure that looks good in every size, then you're going to have a rocking site. Excuse number 5, different devices, different uses. Now, in my opinion, this is the truly legitimate excuse out there, because there are sites that need a lot of rich media on their site, and then they have to scale back for the mobile. And if you try to convert that by just hiding things, you have to get really, really creative with Ajax to only load it if it's the right device, and it's possible to pull it off with a responsive design, but you're probably going to be better with a mobile-only design. But most sites out there, the reason why they're filled with all this junk all over the screen is because these sites were designed by committee. Instead of focusing on the user's needs and focusing on the content, they were designed by committee. Know what you get when you design something by a committee? You get a camel. A camel is a horse designed by committee. It has a big hump to hold water. It can go for days in the desert, but it's not all that pretty. If you want your site to be a stallion, then you got to focus on your users and focus on what their needs are and focus on the content, and then you'll end up with a beautiful site. So what could possibly be right with responsive web design with all these criticisms? One theme to rule them all. Instead, as Sonia touched upon this, I'm just going to go over it quickly. Instead of having 10 different themes, you have one theme. And instead of having to worry about, every single new device that comes out, you worry about your content and making sure your content looks good in the many different sizes. On top of that, and that's really a huge, huge gain. But on top of that, when you build something with responsive web design in mind, what it does is it adds a level of complexity to the design process that forces the stakeholders to really assess what is important in your site. And I think that's the true hidden gain of responsive web design. In the book Mobile Design, Luke W., it's a brilliant book, I highly recommend it. He says, design is the process of gradually applying constraints until an elegant solution remains. Complexity is good, constraints are good. There are 2 ways to build something with responsive web design. The first is to start with a website and then cut things out and nudge things until it looks good on the phone. And that can work, but that approach is called graceful degradation. And graceful degradation is that amusement park ride that you couldn't ride because you were too short. This approach can work for very specific things. If you have a very media-rich, heavy web app like Angry Birds, then you're probably going to want to go with the approach of graceful degradation. You build the most advanced, beautiful app for your browser, for the top browser. Then you make sure there's some sort of experience in other browsers, letting people know that they can get the real experience in Chrome. but not everyone is building Angry Birds. But if you focus on your users and you focus on your content first, that's called progressive enhancement, and that's when you start with a solid foundation, making sure your content looks best in the early browsers, IE6. It's important. If you have a huge site with hundreds of millions of visitors, 1% is a million people, and you don't want to forget about those people, even if they're the ones using IE6. I just want to share one small quote from the book Adaptive Web Design. Aaron Gustafson wrote this, and I relied heavy upon it to prepare this presentation, and I don't think anyone can say it better. It says, progressive enhancement isn't about browsers, it's about crafting experiences that serve your users by giving them access to content without technological restrictions. Progressive enhancement doesn't require that you provide the same experience in different browsers, nor does it preclude you from using the latest and greatest technologies. It simply asks that you honor your content and your users by applying technologies in an intelligent way, layer upon layer, to craft an amazing experience. Browsers and technologies will come and go. Marrying progressive enhancement with your desire to be innovative and do incredible things in your browser is entirely possible as long as you're smart about your choices and you don't lose sight of the user. Just one beautiful example of progressive enhancement. This is a site in IE7. This is a site in IE6. It's actually the same site. Now, this was done using cascading style sheets. I'll touch upon that a little bit later. CSS, but the cascading part of CSS. And this is what's possible. I'm not saying to do this because that messes with the brand, and you never F with the brand, so don't do that. Enough preaching. I want to get into the 10 commandments of making your WordPress theme adaptive. So, commandment number 1, keep content king. That means you want it accessible by all. I said this before, I'll say it again, respect your content and respect your users. And if you start building your theme, when you approach your turning your theme into a responsive theme, you're on the right track. Commandment number 2, think mobile. Don't design the camel. You start with a minimum viable product, and then you may need to pad it up a bit, but you'll be making the most important people happy, and that's your users. And inevitably, without the users, you're not going to get your paycheck either. So you have to remind the project managers that these are the people we have to be thinking about. Commandment number 3, be progressive. Start with a proper foundation. Progressive enhancement doesn't mean that you have to provide the same experience for everything, as I said before, but make sure there is an experience to begin with. Commandment number 4, be semantic. If your code is not semantic, it's bad for SEO, it's bad for your theme. W3C has this wonderful markup tool, markup validator. It's I'll also post that link. It's validator.w3.org. Use it. It'll help you catch all the glaring errors. Commandment number 5. Labeling isn't just a nice suggestion. Use IDs, classification, microformats. Now HTML5 supports ARIA. Search engine crawlers will understand your site better if you label everything clearly. Everyone talks about with SEO you have to have keywords, keywords, keywords. But if you don't label where your content is, you're losing out on your keywords as well. So make sure that you label things properly. But on top of that, as I said before, with sites that are in the hundreds of millions, even if 1% can't see and they have to listen to your site, try listening to how your site sounds like in an audio browser. You'll be surprised, and there's a lot you can do for that. In 2006, Target was sued because they didn't do what they should have been doing in the first place, and they ended up settling for $6 million. $6 million. Commandment number 6, C is for cascade. That Zen Garden example that I showed before of the 2 sites that with the same site in 2 different browsers, that was done using cascading, the cascading part in cascading style sheets, CSS. The way that works is pretty simple. If CSS is very forgiving, if it doesn't understand something, it just moves on to the next thing. So it's very important to make sure that if you use the advanced features of CSS3, you also have fallbacks. Also, there are some cool tricks that you can hide entire pieces of code, because IE8 and IE7 and below, they don't understand media queries. So you can hide entire pieces of code in media queries. Or if you add a selector at the beginning of the row that the browser doesn't understand, it'll skip the entire row. I once lost several hours trying to figure out why the design wasn't working, because I had that one selector that just wasn't working. Commandment number 7, hide advanced CSS from old browsers. This is for when cascading just doesn't cut it. There are some older browsers that think they understand some of the properties, and they don't. And so it's important that some of them you have to hide. Commandment number 8, all JavaScript must be unobtrusive. The C in JavaScript does not stand for cascade. JavaScript is a wonderful tool, and more people are building web apps with it, and it's wonderful because it takes a huge load off the servers. Browsers are much more capable. You can do a lot with JavaScript. However, JavaScript is not fault tolerant, which means your entire site will break if there's one bad line of code or if there's an extra comma somewhere. So you can, and if you don't have your content accessible without JavaScript, then you can end up having to do what happened to the Gawker network, where what they launched with this big, beautiful Ajax network, the site, and the pages came up blank because there is, one rogue line of code. Commandment number 9, update your scripts. There's a reason why updates come out. Google Maps came out with version 3 of their maps, and one of the clients I was working with, they were trying to figure out why their maps stopped working, and it's because they didn't upgrade it. So it's important to keep on top of things, but not just that. You're losing a lot of important enhancements. When jQuery comes out with new updates, it's because there's enhancements that will speed up your site, and there's cross-browser compatibilities that they add. So if you keep on top of your scripts, you'll be gaining quite a bit. Commandment number 10, optimize your assets. These are the low-hanging fruit that too many people ignore. Very simple things like loading the right image size. Don't have a huge 3 gigabyte image to show up as 600 pixels. That'll slow down everything. Minify your CSS and JavaScript and gzip it. Then there's more advanced things you can do. Look up Nicole Sullivan on object-oriented CSS. These are all wonderful things that you can do to make sure your theme is adaptive. Now, you want to make your website rocking so that it'll look good in all the latest browsers, and it'll scale and look great. Remember, real responsive web design is really about 2 things. Respect your users and respect your content. And if you do that, you're going to have a beautiful site. And don't forget what it was like when you were a kid and your parents brought you to that amusement park and you saw that really awesome ride, but you had to be this tall to get in and you're that short. Think about that when you're building your website, and it's going to be rocking. So again, thank you so much for having me here. Any questions?
Can we go back to that commandment number 2 for a second?
Sure.
I don't remember that commandment,
Think mobile.
Okay, so is the idea to start out with a thing that looks good for a mobile site and then build upwards?
So the idea of that is when you're setting out to design your site, before you even get to choosing a theme, you want to start with when you're assessing what should be on your site and what should be visible, what should be accessible, and how it should be accessible. You think about the mobile first because there's so many limitations on the mobile. As far as navigation, you don't want to have the whole first screen be just your navigation, because then people won't see the content. If you load big, huge, heavy things in your page, then the page won't load up quickly. So think mobile as an entire approach to building websites. If you start with the minimum viable product of what it is your users really need, and then build from there, sometimes you're going to have to add the heavy things, but you want to start with that basic concept so that you can keep that in mind. Does Does that answer your question? Any other questions?
What's a good mobile WordPress site?
A good mobile WordPress site. There's a lot of cool responsive sites that came out there, adaptive websites that came out. I would say CSS Tricks is pretty cool. How it loads in mobile. It's very slick. It's very fast. Smashing Magazine. Check them out.
Just today, we had an article on responsive with WordPress.
Yep. It was a great article. You should read it.
Did you hear that?
A couple days ago, Smashing Magazine came out with a whole article about responsive WordPress. Any other questions? Yes. Yes, my name is. My name is Jack Reichert. You can follow me on Twitter, at Jack Reichert. My website is jackreichert.com. It's all really simple. Just get my name and you'll find me there. If you enjoyed the theme, I tweet this stuff all the time. If you enjoyed the talk, I tweet this stuff all the time. Any other questions?
You said audio browser. Is there a specific one that you use?
I have a Mac, so it's built in. The question was audio browsers, which one I use. I have a Mac, so VoiceOver is built into Mac. You can Google it quickly. There's great instructions how to set it up. And it's pretty scary how sites come out. I just did that this past week, and I'm going to have to overhaul my site to make it work well. Any other questions?
What was the name of the adaptive book you said?
Adaptive Web Design by Aaron Gustafson. It's right here. His name is right here.
Oh, okay.
Thank you.